Hello, all of my Mac friends. I miss all of you, and I can't wait to see you guys again. Because I miss you so much, I am wearing my Liberty Lions t-shirt today to show you Lion Love. Because I miss you guys so much, I needed to wear my Liberty t-shirt to make me feel a little bit better today. So today, what we're going to do is read some of our state books for our state challenge that we were doing. For any kids who don't remember about the state challenge, what it is we have a map that we have papers that look just like this. And everyone can get one of these papers. You write your name at the top, and then you have a book. We have books that come from each state, and then as you read each book from each state, we will mark that state off. If you're able to mark off all of the states, then you'll get to go to a fun party. And we'll make sure to find a way to have this party no matter what. We'll figure it out. I'm going to read the books to you guys since you don't have the books with you. That way you still have the opportunity to do the challenge. If you have already read some books, I have your papers with me. So see, we have a friend here who I've already have some states marked out because she's already started. But I also have blank ones for friends who have not started this challenge yet. What you need to do is, after you watch this video, you'll tell your parents, and then your parents can send me an email and tell me that you were listening to the books that I read today. If I know that you were listening to the books that I read today, then I will either start you a brand new paper or mark the books from the states that I've read off of your current paper. So let's go ahead and get started. I think we're only going to do 2 today. I know some of our books are kind of lengthy, so we're going to just do 2. I have my egg again, but I realize in my last reading video, I covered it up, which is not great. So I'm going to turn it on again, but this time, as you can see, I've already cleared a spot on my bookshelf, and I've tested to make sure you can still see it. So I'm going to leave it right there. As I read, you can look at it, and I am turned at an angle so that you can still see that, but hopefully also still see my books. So we'll see if this works a little bit better for us, okay? So the first book that we are going to read is our book from New York. See, it's got our New York sticker on it. So we know that this is our New York book. This book is called Balloons Over Broadway. Now, this is our New York book because it talks about the origin, or another word for origin, is the beginning of the Macy's Day Parade and how that came to be. So that's what our book is all about. Let's get started. Balloons Over Broadway. From the time he was a little boy, Tony Stark loved to figure out how to make things move. He once said he became a marionette man when he was only 6 years old. His father had asked him to feed their chickens at 6:30 in the morning every day. Tony had an idea. What if he could feed the chickens without leaving his bed? He rigged up some pulleys and ran rope from the chicken coop door to his bedroom window. That night, he spread chicken feed outside the chicken coop door. The next morning, Tony pulled on the rope and the door to the chicken coop opened. The chickens ate their breakfast. Tony stayed snug in his bed, and his dad, so impressed, never made Tony do another chore. I wish I could be that smart about figuring out ways to do my chores. When Tony grew up, he moved to London, which is in England, where he discovered that no one was making marionettes for kids anymore. So out of wood, cloth, and strings, Tony began to make puppets. He figured out ways to make his marionettes' movement so lifelike that they performed as if they were real actors. Word soon spread about Tony's amazing marionettes. When Tony moved to New York City, the Tony Stark marionettes had begun performing on Broadway. In the heart of New York City, in Herald Square, was the biggest store on earth, R.H. Macy's department store. Macy's had heard about Tony's puppets and asked him to design a puppet parade for the store's holiday windows. So Tony made new puppets based on storybook characters, then attached them to gears and pulleys to make them move. Designed puppets to put in the storefront. Oh, that looks really nice. I like that. In Macy's Wondertown window, Tony's mechanical marionettes danced across the stage as if by magic. All day long they performed to shoppers, jostling for a better look. But Macy's had an even bigger job in store for Tony. Many of the people working at Macy's were immigrants, and as the holidays approached, they missed their own holiday traditions of music and dancing in the streets. Macy's agreed to put on a parade for their employees, and they hired Tony to help. Tony was also an immigrant, so he loved the idea of creating a parade based on street carnivals from all over the world. He made costumes and built horse-drawn floats, and Macy's even arranged to bring in bears, elephants, and camels from the Central Park Zoo. That sounds crazy with all those animals. Animals don't like to behave very well, do they? So I wonder how this will go. The animals joined hundreds of Macy's employees on Thanksgiving Day, 1924, winding their way from Harlem to Herald Square. It was a dazzling parade. In fact, Macy's first parade was such a success that they decided to have one every year on Thanksgiving Day to celebrate America's own holiday. Can you see that parade? I know I covered up the egg, but I wanted to make sure you could see the parade. Each year the parade grew, but when Macy's brought in lions and tigers in addition to the bears and elephants and camels, the animals roared and growled and frightened the children. Uh-oh. Tony, can you think of something spectacular? Okay. Macy's asked Tony to replace the animals. But with what? I'm thinking it might be something similar to what he's done in the past. Maybe. Tony hoped to replace the animals with some kind of puppets, but his marionettes were less than 3 feet tall. He would have to make much larger puppets in order for them to be seen in the parade. And how could he make them strong enough to hold up in bad weather, yet light enough to move up and down the streets? Tony knew of a company in Ohio that made blimps out of rubber, the perfect material for any weather. When he called the company and showed them his sketches, they agreed to make what Tony wanted. Still, how could he make his big puppets move? Then Tony had an idea from an Indonesian rod puppet in his toy collection. On Thanksgiving Day, Tony's creatures, some as high as 16 feet, spilled into the street, and the crowds cheered wildly. Part puppet, part balloon, the air-filled rubberbacks wobbled down the avenues, propped up by wooden sticks. There's the parade. But now the sidewalks are so packed with people that only those in the first few rows could really see the parade. Tony realized his puppets would have to be even bigger and higher off the ground, and though the sticks helped to steer the puppets, they were stiff and heavy. Tony wanted his balloons to articulate, or to move and gesture, more like puppets, but how? With a marionette, the controls are above and the puppets hang down. But what if the controls were below the puppet and could rise up? Interesting question. During the next year, Tony set his new idea into motion. This time he asked the company in Ohio to make balloons out of rubberized silk, as strong as rubber, but lighter than rubber alone. Most important, Tony ordered the balloons to be filled not just with air, but with helium too. Since helium is lighter than air, it would make the balloons rise. Once the puppets were completed, they were deflated and shipped back to Tony in New York. Tony did not know if everything would go as planned. What if the balloons are filled with too much helium? What if one hits a sharp object? What? Will they fit? Will they fit under the elevated train track? I mean, there's a lot to think about. New York City's got all kinds of stuff in it, and he's trying to fly these balloons over. It was still dark on Thanksgiving morning when Tony filled the balloons with helium, tethering them down into sandbags. By 1 p.m., the sidewalks were packed with people ready for the parade. Then one by one, Tony cut the lines to the sandbags. Let's have a parade. He's ready. Let's see how it goes. Ooh, now this is a cool picture. And the magnificent upside-down marionettes rose up to the skies. I'm going to show you this picture. It starts up here. Look at that. That's cool, right? Look how high above the ground it is. I like it. Oh, nodding and waving to the crowds below. They sailed past Central Park. They sailed down Broadway. They shimmied and swayed through the canyons of New York City. High above the crowds, they flounced in the afternoon wind, pulling the rope handlers this way and that. Yet with every heave-ho, the balloons gestured and articulated like wild puppets, and the crowd screamed for more. After the balloons were eased under the L, they ended in front of Macy's at Tony's Wondertown windows. It was a parade New York would never forget. And from that day on, every Thanksgiving morning, crowds have lined the sidewalks of New York, coming to see what new balloons would rise to the skies for Macy's famous parade. Tony Sogg, the puppeteer who loved to figure out how to make things move, had set the stage with a little rigging for a puppet to be anything anyone could imagine it to be. The end. And so, on Thanksgiving, if you watch the Macy's Day Parade on your television, on your TV, then you can see the parade that we're talking about. And now you know how it started. So you know the story behind it. All right. That's New York, which is personally one of my favorite states. But let's try. I think we should do this one. The Boy Who Changed the World. I like the title. This is Iowa. And it's set on a farm in Iowa, so that's why we're reading about this book to go with Iowa. All right, let's see. I want to tell you a story about the boy who changed the world. His name was Norman Borlaug. Norman lived on a farm in Iowa. He loved to play hide and seek with his little sisters in their father's cornfield. Norman was tall and skinny with hair so light it looked like the silk that sprouted from the ears of corn. Norman was very good at hiding in the cornfields. Norman tiptoed quietly so his sisters couldn't hear him. He crept along until he was just close enough to catch them. Gotcha! The girls giggled and squealed. Now you hide, Norman. Norman ran to hide in the field, careful not to knock down any corn stalks. Just yesterday, his father had reminded him, "You know, son, we're blessed to have all this corn. There are many people in the world who do not have enough to eat." What would it be like? What would it be like to be hungry all the time? Norman wondered. As he looked at the endless rows of corn, there has to be a way this corn can feed hungry people, he thought. Right then and there, Norman decided to change the world. Norman learned everything he could about plants. When he was grown, he worked for a man named Mr. Wallace. Mr. Wallace said, "Norman, I want you to use what you learned in school to make special seeds. Those special seeds will grow into super plants and feed more people than ordinary plants. Super plants. To make the special seeds, Norman had to go to faraway places and work in the rain and summer heat, but he never gave up. Finally, Norman developed the special seeds that grew into super plants. Norman's special seeds of corn and wheat and rice were sent all over the world. Those special seeds grew into super plants that fed the hungry people, just like Norman dreamed about as a boy. And guess what? Norman saved more than 2 billion people from starving. 2 billion. It's true. Norman was the boy who changed the world. Or maybe it was a boy named Henry. I want to tell you a story about the boy who changed the world. His name was Henry Wallace. Henry's father was a professor, and one of his students was a young man named George. Henry loved to go with George on expeditions in the countryside. George knew more about plants than anyone Henry had ever known. Henry peered over the edge of the water to inspect a plant growing on the bank. "Don't get too close to the water, Henry," George said. "Your daddy will have a fit if you get eaten by a hippopotamus." Henry laughed. "Hippos don't live in Iowa. I'm just trying to get a better look at this flower." "You know, Henry, there are lots of plants and ways to learn about them. We can use that knowledge to help others. It's a very important mission." "George, I want that to be my mission. Will you help me?" "Of course. Remember, Henry, you can make a difference." Henry learned so much about plants that he grew up to be the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. Agriculture is farming and growing plants and all of that. Then Henry Wallace became Vice President of the United States of America. Vice President! Wow. From that important office, Vice President Wallace, you can still call him Henry, continued his mission to learn how plants could help people. As Vice President, Henry wanted to help people around the world grow more food, so he hired a young man named Norman Borlaug. The same Norman who later developed the special seeds that grew into super plants that fed the hungry people. So you see, because Henry is the one who came up with the idea of special seeds and hired Norman to make them, it was really Henry who changed the world. Or maybe it was George. I want to tell you a story about a boy who changed the world. His name was George Washington. Now, before you continue, you must know that he is not the George Washington of whom you are thinking. The U.S. President George Washington lived a long time before the boy George Washington in this story. George's father died before he was born, and his mother died when he was very young. But the good news is that a nice couple named Moses and Susan Carver adopted George and made him a part of their family. "Well, George, what have you got there?" asked his neighbor, Mrs. McLeod, as she plopped down on a tree stump beside the young boy. "I'm whittling a crutch for my friend who hurt his ankle." "Just look at you, creating from that big old tree branch. George, you've got a sharp mind and a kind heart." "Thank you, ma'am, but it's not much. Won't take me too long." "I bet your friend will be mighty grateful for that crutch. You know, George, little things can make a big difference. Everything we do matters. Every action you take, even small things, can change the world." Sure enough, George Washington Carver changed the world. He became a teacher and an inventor. For instance, he invented 266 things from the peanut that we still use today. From the sweet potato, George invented 88 things that we still use today. But he did something much more important than that. And you guys remember those facts from what we studied back in February for Black History Month. And we studied about George Washington Carver and that. When George Washington Carver was at Iowa State University, he had a teacher named Professor Wallace. On weekends, George would roam the fields and forests with the professor's 6-year-old son, Henry, teaching the boy about plants and how many ways they could be used to help people. Now, Let's see here. Norman made the special seeds that grew into super plants that fed the world's hungry people. But he couldn't have done it without Henry, who had the idea to make super plants and hired him. But Henry would not have had the idea without George, who spent so much time teaching young Henry about plants. So there you have it. George Washington Carver was the boy who changed the world. Wait, we forgot about his dad, Moses. I'm going to tell you a story about the boy who changed the world. His name was Moses Carver. He lived on a farm with his mom and dad way up north. Moses pulled nails out of some old barnwood while his pet rooster Buzz watched. "Moses," his mother called as she walked toward him in the field. "What are you doing?" "Well, I figured if I got these nails out of this wood, we could reuse it for something like patching the chicken coop or building a shed." "Thank you, Moses. That's a wonderful idea. I'm sure Buzz will appreciate it come winter," she said with a smile. "He hasn't helped with a single nail," Moses chuckled. "You know, dear, every choice you make, good or bad, can make a difference. I'm proud of you for making a good choice today." Ooh, I like how this book is talking so much about choices, because we have lots of conversations about good choices, don't we? And how they can make or break our day, right? Good choices. When Moses grew up, he married a lady named Susan, and together with a few workers, they managed a farm. They were very happy, but one night some men tried to hurt them. Outlaws called Quantrill's Raiders rode onto the farm. They burned down Moses' barn and kidnapped some of the workers. One of the people they kidnapped was a little boy named George. Moses had to do something. He searched and finally found young George. Moses traded his favorite horse in return for the little boy. That night, as Moses walked home, remember, he didn't have a horse. He told George that he would adopt him. Moses also promised to give the boy a new name. As the baby boy drifted off to sleep, Moses whispered, "Good night, little George Washington Carver." So if Moses hadn't saved George from the outlaws, George wouldn't have grown up to take Henry on walks in the forest. Then Henry wouldn't have become interested in plants and later hired Norman. Without Henry's idea, Norman wouldn't have developed the special seeds that grew into super plants. And without the super plants, 2 billion people would have nothing to eat. Nothing. It's odd, isn't it? Every time something happens, something else happens. It's called the butterfly effect. When a butterfly flaps its wings, it moves tiny pieces of air that move other tiny pieces of air that move other tiny pieces of air. In fact, on the other side of the world, they might be feeling a big whoosh of wind, all because a butterfly flapped its wings here just a few minutes ago. That means every little thing you do matters. What you do today, yesterday, and tomorrow. You are important, and every action you take matters, not only for you, but for the people around you. Everything you do matters for everyone and for all time. When you think about it like that, wow, that means you can be the kid who changes the world. I think that all of my kids in my group are fully capable of making a choice that could change the world. I think you guys make great choices. And I think that you are going to grow up and do great things. But you can even do great things right now, the things that you're learning, right? Like we learned in the book. All right, our video is a little long today because we read 2 books. But if you did listen to both books, or even if you only listen to one and then you go back and watch the video later, it's okay. You don't have to watch this video all at once. You just have to have your parents email me so that I know that you have read the books, and then you'll be good. I will make sure that it's marked on your sheet, and then we can keep track of how many books you are all reading, and then we can have our party and celebrate how everyone read all across America. All right, well, I look forward to seeing you guys again. We'll do our reading enrichment on Monday with a new book and a new craft. And don't forget, tomorrow I'm going to post a video and we're going to vote on our book covers that you all have been working so hard to draw. So make sure you watch for that video, and then after that, I'll see you on Monday for our next activity. All right, guys, have a good day and enjoy the awesome, awesome weather outside.